Men all over the world are struggling with their mental health. Anxiety, depression, and suicide rates among men continue to rise. There are many underlying factors to these challenges that need to be addressed in order for meaningful change to happen. To help address these issues, we'll be talking about some of the challenges men are experiencing. Welcome to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Centre podcast. Each episode will bring you insights from our expert counselors and tips and strategies to improve your mental well-being. I'm your host, Catherine Hertig. Calgary Counseling Centre and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling for anyone in Alberta with no wait list and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. On this episode, I talk with Burnett, registered social worker, about building resilience and developing healthy coping skills. Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Shay. To start, could you just, introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background as a counselor?
Sure. Thanks, Catherine. I stepped into this field later in life, and I think one of the reasons I was interested in doing this podcast with you is because men's mental health has been a particular interest of mine. That in my earlier years, I worked a lot in the bush, did lots of blue-collar jobs, labor jobs, and in my late 20s, kind of realized that I wanted to work with my own mental health and kind of turn my life around in a different direction, which then led me to being interested in helping other people.
Excellent.
That led to working in group homes, which led to working on a diploma, then a degree. And I kept wanting to learn more. And as I built capacity to learn and work with people, I saw there was more to discover. And now I just see it's endless. There's just so much to learn about helping people.
That's quite a change in careers for sure.
Yeah. And I think part of this particular topic interests me because at one time, if you asked me how I felt, I could tell you what I did, but I didn't actually have any language for how I felt.
Right. Yeah. We want to focus more on men's mental health. Not to say that it's any more important than any other demographic, but because there's still this hesitancy for men to reach out for help. And a lot of them are struggling. So we really want to open up that conversation around it.
Yeah. And I think it's incredibly important because if we look at the health of our society, well, men are an integral part of society. So if men aren't acting out in a healthy way, it's affecting everyone.
Right.
And I'll use broad terms as men because, of course, there's a whole spectrum, including trans. There's just the cultural different things. But in general, I see that difference. And it's easier to, I think, be angry at men for not being healthy and acting in different ways that are self-destructive or isolating or so forth. But in the end, that's the paradigm shift. If we can help men realize that there are healthy strategies to learn, healthy tools to learn to put in their tool chest. And that traditionally there's lots of them haven't been taught because men are just supposed to suck it up, keep going. And it doesn't work that well.
No, I think it's such a harmful message.
Yeah.
So, today we're kind of focusing on the idea of resilience and bouncing back after, hard times. Mm-hmm. And the coping skills that you need to kind of be able to do that. So why do you think that it's important to specifically address resilience and coping skills for men's mental health? What kind of unique challenges do men often face in this regard?
Well, they get a lot of messages. I was talking to somebody from Nepal this morning, and he said in his cultural group that if you're a man and you talk about mental health issues, you're considered to be weak and useless. And that mental health is for something that's really extreme, maybe schizophrenia or something. It's right. Something big. There's many areas on the spectrum of what the message is for men. But I think a lot of it is that it's not in a comfort zone to talk about. Mm-hmm. So how that regards to resilience is that you're supposed to push through, provide, it's the message from Hollywood to be strong, independent. All these messages are portrayed. Meanwhile, men are going through all the same distress levels as every other.
Oh, exactly. They experience the exact same emotions. And
men experience depression, but it's seen as anger.
Right. Yeah, that's what I heard, that it kind of it shows up differently in men than women.
Yeah.
So, resilience, it is a term, often used when we talk about mental health. Can you just kind of talk about what that means, what it means to be resilient, to have resiliency?
Well, I think that it is one area that one of the strengths that traditionally men have had is to keep going despite all the odds. And that's needed. And that's traditionally was needed. And there's a lot of strength within that. Like, okay, we're just going to put aside the feelings and get the job done.
Yeah.
And we're going to, like, it's cold, it's whatever, things need to get done. You're going to go forward and do it. So that's one part of resilience, to get back up and keep going. The issue, I think, is if that's your only tool in the resilience tool chest, you're trying to fit a hammer for every job. And so the missing part is resilience, especially maybe in our more modern society where people can be a little bit more isolated, is that it also includes being supported by community, being able to go to your elders, your uncles, your parents to say, okay, how do I walk through this? Being supported and know you're supported. The other one that I'm noting is that being able to regulate and being able to and with a society with lots of media input, I think we're dealing with a lot of people that are anxious because there isn't necessarily quiet time spent. And so when distressing things come up, where if one is spending time meditating, reflecting, sitting down and have quieting moments, one can be able to be resilient to think through it. But because we're living in such a society of input, that it's actually harder to be resilient. It's easier to be distressed. It's easier to be disruptive.
Yeah. I like what you said about community, because it's hard to wrap my head around that idea that is so pervasive that you should be able to handle everything on your own. That just seems wild to me, because you can't expect any one person to know how to handle every situation that comes their way. You know what I mean?
But that's funny that you say that, because that's the exact message. I remember that message.
Yeah.
And it makes it really hard to learn new things because you're just supposed to know.
Of course. Yeah. You're supposed to know it or just figure it out on your own.
Yeah. And it ties back to that. There's some, that's where there's healthy resilience. There's pride. Okay, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to work through things.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's that thing of that can really be a heavy load to carry too. And I don't think sometimes people realize that, or they don't even realize the symptoms of their mental health deteriorating, because they put upon that expectation that I am supposed to figure everything out. And the thing I think that's missing sometimes is men don't know that their frustration level or isolating or different things are actually signs that their nervous system is feeling challenged right now.
Yeah.
They're emotionally feeling challenged.
Yeah, if that's a new concept for you, it'd be hard to have that kind of self-awareness and pick up on those things. In your practice with clients, and I know this is really broad because men are coming to you for all sorts of reasons, but what kinds of things, what do you recommend to them to kind of help build their resiliency and expand their coping skills?
Great question. I think one of the things that I think by the time somebody comes to see me, they've recognized that their level of distress is so high that they're not feeling like they're able to keep going well. And I can be a safe place to go to, or any counselor can be a safe place to go to. And so one of the things is just slow steps, but starting to share more, even saying just I'm having a rough day, and seeing how people respond.
Right.
Little bids of vulnerability to go out into the world.
And generally, when you give that, I'm going to say give that assignment, but it's not necessarily that formal. But when you get clients to do that, generally, what's the response? Do they find that difficult? Are they surprised by how that goes?
Definitely difficult.
Yeah.
I think often, there's a good percentage of people come in because the relationships are deteriorating. So that can be a real motivating factor. And so that's what I try to remind people that, okay, here is, just like you learned how to build a house or fix the car or do whatever, work on your computer program, whatever your skill set is. This is another thing about by practice, you get better at it.
Of course. Yeah. It's like any skill.
And then the other part is to remind people that I think often men will see themselves as wanting to hold and be a provider and do things for the people around them. So it's a reminder that you give somebody else a gift when you let them do that for you. So you're really helping the people, because there's a lot of trust in that, and there's a lot of honor for somebody else to hold space for you.
I was recently speaking to a family member, and they were saying they find it really difficult to be vulnerable with their partner, to let their partner know if they're having a hard time. So if someone's experiencing that, how do you kind of help them have that mindset shift to realizing that it's a good thing for a relationship, for you to share those feelings?
Well, it's risk versus reward.
Yeah.
So there's risk to it because not everybody is going to be able to respond, or some people may just tell you to buck up, or or I don't have the time or something. But it's also coming back to, do you want to have happy and healthy relationships? Do you want other people to like share the journey in life with you and you share
Right.
theirs? So it's like letting people know that there isn't any growth without risk. There
Of
really
course.
isn't.
Yeah.
So
It's hard to accept for sure, but that's very true.
and then the piece comes like, okay, so your system is going to feel like a lot of pushback from doing it. So it's reminding somebody like, where else have you stepped into your adventure edge and it's been risky? And so and to remind yourself of your values and skills and experience. And then the other piece is like learning how to breathe, learning how to regulate. Like the science of your nervous system when it's anxious is that the heart beats faster, the blood rushes to the brain,
Yeah.
the blood leaves your extremities. It thinks that the tiger is going to attack you. Meanwhile, you're just going to have a conversation
Right.
to tell somebody
Or
you
make
love
a phone call. Yeah.
them. But your nervous system thinks that, the lion is going to eat you.
Yeah. Then you're in full out danger.
So you learn, the other part of it is helping people get ready, is learning how to work with the distress in their body. Like a really simple one that I let people know is you rub your hands. Rub your hands back and forth for 1 minute to 2 minutes, and
Yeah.
you literally can calm your nervous system down.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
You're signaling like a bilateral stimulation, and you're letting your body know the blood can come back down to the extremities, kind of help you
Yeah.
distract.
Nice. I like that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is the same thing, but I've heard of those, those grounding techniques. I really like the one like about the 5 senses.
Yeah. Yep.
Where you identify, things you can see and hear, and like it just really kind of brings you back to what's happening right now.
Yep. It signals to your body that you're safe enough to look around, and whatever the trigger was to come to that point of anxiety, it's like, okay.
We've talked a bit about regulation exercises. What other kind of coping strategies and techniques do you kind of work with men on? Like coping techniques that are, more healthy than, let's say, just going out drinking with your friends or,
Right.
getting really angry.
Well, generally people have interests. They're generally from childhood, there's some interest in life, things that they really like doing that weren't a job. And sometimes we're lucky enough that our job gets to be those interests. I'll use the life balance wheel.
Yeah.
And work is just one pie. Family is one pie. Like for those who have spiritual beliefs, that's a really strong place to go. Your service, volunteering to other people, physical health. One of the ones that I've been practicing for the last year and a bit and recommend to everyone is cold plunges. Cold showers, ice cubes on the foreheads.
Yeah.
One of the neat things is not just like the cold water helps you have that grounding parasympathetic response, come back down. The breathing before helps you like learn how to be in distress and down to regulation, but it also teaches you to meet difficult things.
It's true. Yeah.
Just to step into something that's difficult, you're like already taken on the challenge.
Right.
You've learned that, I have courage. I can like step into difficulty.
And it doesn't even have to be that conscious of a thing, like I'm doing something hard, but just going through those actions, like, having a cold shower or bath or whatever again and again, like you just kind of develop that.
Builds confidence.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, I'm always fascinated by like how really intertwined like mental well-being is with physical health. And I don't know if we don't remember that all the time.
Yeah.
But it is like, I mean, you're in a bad mood, even just a walk can totally change that. And like what we put into our bodies, like what we eat, that has an impact on how we feel. And
it certainly does. There's an interesting thing like with serotonin, which there's a lot of antidepressants are around, like serotonin inhibitors, uptake inhibitors, is that 90% of your serotonin lives in your gut, is made in your stomach.
Is it?
If your stomach doesn't have really healthy gut biome, it's going to be hard to feel okay. Because your stomach is not being able to produce what it needs.
It all starts with, getting back to basics and moving your body and eating right and sleeping well. So Shay, coping skills, I mean, they're definitely going to vary from person to person. What kind of advice do you have for men in kind of discovering the coping strategies that work best for them?
Practice. Yeah. Try them out. There's no way that you're going to just be able to try one once or twice. That's a bit of a, I think, kind of impatient dream that somehow I'm just going to be able to do this and I'll be okay. You didn't develop who you are overnight. Generally, by the time people come in, they've been alive for a couple decades or more. So recognizing that, go out and practice something for a month or two.
Yeah.
And see, like, how does that affect? Like what are you noticing over a bunch of different circumstances, how that is? Like good things in our life, good habits take time.
Can you kind of list some examples? I mean, we talked about, different hobbies and interests and
Sure.
yeah, it's just some different examples of coping techniques.
Well, one is 60 seconds will save your life for somebody else's. The essence of that is to take breaks throughout the day. Just a minute, just 2 minutes, just 3 minutes. Breathe, check in, look at the environment. And right there, you're stopping your system from being on survival and going forward and running from the next thing to the next.
Right.
You're interjecting and leaving moment maybe for a spiritual practice or just a personal check-in practice, a thinking, a calming. Yeah, other ones are, some kind of like exercise that uses both sides of your body. As far as I can tell from like EMDR practice or things that help you be balanced, even driving can be a helpful balance because you're using both sides of your hemisphere.
Okay. You mentioned EMDR. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, which is eye movements or feeling on both hands, stimulation on both hands. And it helps you process things that have been imprinted on your nervous system, generally that are difficult. Generally, people come in for counseling because what's been imprinted is hindering them and getting triggered.
Okay, like certain traumas and stuff?
Yeah, when a person comes to that state, there's some questions, there's different things that are asked, and then one uses this bilateral stimulation to allow themselves to experience what got stuck, what got imprinted and has not been able to move.
Okay.
So you step into that in small doses, feel it, but also remember that you're present now and strong, and that allows you to work through old, difficult feelings that are trapped.
Okay. Yeah.
Sensations, memories, those kinds of things.
And that's kind of a technique that you use as a counselor with clients. That's not something someone would do on their own.
Yeah. I think the reason sometimes not to do it alone is because part of what made things not resilient, made it more traumatic, was that there wasn't somebody to support, to walk through it.
Right.
So by doing it with somebody else, you provide that opportunity for two people, for your nervous system to start trusting in community. But tying back, what I've noticed from doing Tai Chi, yoga, and weightlifting is that you can also just be processing difficult feelings while you're doing that. You can help move through and you can just allow that flood of whatever the tensions of the day, the sadness, so forth, work through.
I've used that. What do you call it? What would you call EMDR? Is that a modality or...
Yeah, therapy. Yep.
Yeah, I've used that therapy technique with my own counselor, and I kind of found it helpful when I run because that kind of uses that bilateral motion for sure. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting.
Very cool. Yeah. We touched on this a little bit. I mean, men often pride themselves on self-reliance, handling things on their own. So how can we reframe asking for help as a strength rather than a weakness?
One is to honor that self-reliance and that strength. Countering that is to recognize that, okay, these skills that men have developed have actually been very protective. They've actually had some use. It's more like it could be hypermasculinity, it could be independence, self-reliance, so forth. So part of like when working with is like, okay, those are useful at times, but that's not all that you need to get along with.
Right.
Look at how hard it is to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
If you think about that in a term of strength, well, that takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
It definitely does, for sure.
Yeah. So if you want to like challenge, like, okay, you're strong. Okay. Share something sensitive, share something vulnerable, because there's a test of strength. That's a bit of like, I think, an interesting, challenging reframe to help people recognize that it's okay. I think a lot of it is just letting people know, educating the reality that it's okay that you have like sadness. It's okay that you have frustration. It's okay.
Yeah. And I guess, like anything else that you've been talking about, it would just take practice, right? Attempting in like with someone you feel safe and to be vulnerable.
Yeah. People might not even have the language for what they're experiencing. They just know that things aren't going well. And they're feeling like they're bumping up. They're overwhelmed all the time.
Yeah.
So giving that like education seems to be a really key point in there. And I think it's really interesting too, just teaching about how the nervous system responds. Then you can deal with things. Then you actually have some ability and some understanding of what's going on. And it's not just something dramatic inside one's own head.
Right. Yeah. As being able to identify like what's going on in your body, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in your opinion, what are some common reasons behind men's reluctance to seek professional mental health help?
It's so far out of their scope of normal that it's like a big step.
Okay.
Like what would that actually be like? Stopping and sharing something with something. What stops people from reaching out? Well, I think it's what men hold is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And they really still try to hold, this is what it's okay for me to do. And I'll also say it's changing. What I notice in each younger generation is that there's more men seem to be more open to talking about things.
You are seeing that?
Yeah.
Well, that's hopeful.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think we can address, an older generation or men that are hesitant? How do we kind of change their mind
or invite them in? Invite them in to consider it. Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think with really practical understandings of what this is, sometimes scientific. I was, on this hike and somebody with two therapists. So it was interesting. So, of course, this is not all for all people, but providing data points that make sense, I think, is a pretty grounding way to help men recognize, like, oh, when this and this happens, this is the result. So our relationships, are you arguing like, 3-4 times a week with your partner? Perhaps it's time to learn some communication skills.
Yeah.
Talk about, there's different ways to work through disagreements. Entrance points. Are you finding yourself just watching TV, not going out and visiting people, different kind of isolating things? Perhaps you're experiencing some anxiety or low mood. I forget what the stats are for depression. Maybe in Canada, but they're fairly high for how many Canadians will experiencing it at some point.
Oh yeah, it was 1 in 5, and then during COVID it was 1 in 4. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it doesn't mean that something's wrong with you.
Right. That's probably a big thing is, we still have to normalize mental health a lot more. I mean, I think we're getting better, but that idea, I think, if someone gets help, if someone, sees a counselor, there's probably that sense inside like that there's something wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the medical system is incredible for how much it helps people deal with, medical things. The shadow side of it is that pathologizes people that something is wrong with them and that they need to get fixed. And so I think just what you said, that it can be internalized, this is happening, I'm bad. And so letting it know rather than this is actually about like learning skills. This is about recognizing patterns.
Right.
This is about having a chance to share things that cause tension in your life and a safe place to share them.
Yeah. And I think having it, if anyone thinks that something's wrong with them, that ties up to their identity and their self-worth. And it's like, oh, something's wrong with me. It's always going to be wrong with me. Like this, just feeling that you can't change. But yeah, just simplifying it, like you said, down to just the idea of building skills. Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's such a hard place to be, where you talked about there, where it's like, I'm never going to be able to change. That, I think, is what leads to depression and like that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. It's like,
right.
Just no matter what I do, this just keeps coming up and I just keep bumping into it. And
which I think it's an easy place to go in your mind. Like if you're experiencing, a certain emotion or thought for a long period of time, it's easy to kind of think like, is this ever going to change?
Yep.
I remember when I was young and even like just getting a bad cold or flu, after a few days, it would be like, I don't remember feeling like well ever. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
So yeah, I think it's an easy place to go in your mind, but we've got to remember that we've felt better before and we can again.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yep, for sure. And that's the importance of being around other people. But when we don't feel well, that's more likely when we're going to isolate.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of counterintuitive process. It's like, this is when you need to reach out, even though your whole system is kind of being protective.
When you're working with clients, how do you approach that with them? If they're isolating, how do you kind of inspire them to see the importance of community and connection and socializing?
Really like being discerning with what's happening and helping people recognize that they're much more than their feelings. And Canadians use this term, I feel like, and it really I think embeds this contortion in the mind that the way I'm thinking and feeling is all one. And it's being able to recognize that feelings, just like you talked about being sick, they're not necessarily accurate to the reality of life.
Yeah.
So being able to separate that and be able to like insert, okay, this is a period of time. This does not have to last forever.
Right.
And so trusting that when one takes these steps repeatedly, then one can bring themselves back into harmony.
Yeah.
And you may want to, like, part of the trouble is, back to social media, we see all these figures in around our lives that are in these grand places. And here we are, mulling through our mundane lives often, or just doing simple things. That can be that's quite anxiety provoking.
Totally. Yeah.
So
you think like your life should look like theirs.
Yeah. And that can leave a disconnect to actually being able to be enjoying and present and grateful for the life one has. You ask like how to help people get out. Well, don't aim for the very end. Like, what's the next step? If your dream is here at 10 and right now you feel at 2, well, let's aim for 2.2 because that's actually reasonable. You build confidence, build capacity. If there's trauma involved, it's actually healthier to go small steps because you really have to teach your nervous system that it can trust being more present.
Yeah.
It can trust being more vulnerable where it really wasn't safe at some point.
This is a great chat, Che. Is there anything you kind of want to wrap up with? Anything we haven't touched on?
That I heard something recently is like, we're much more than we think we are. And part of being in a tough space is that we actually have these blinders of pain and low risk tolerance and hurt and kind of isolation on. And I just really like encourage men, because this is what this is aimed for, or people working with men, to let them know that it's going to be much better than you could have ever imagined if you give yourself a chance. If you just give yourself a chance to kind of like take some more steps. And when you open that door, the door just seems to open a bit more on its own because you're literally putting where your mind goes, that energy flows. And yeah, it's important. Everyone's important. And you aren't, if you've done things that are hurtful towards people, well, okay, then you make amends. You figure out how to work through that and help create justice with that. But that's not all that you are. You still have lots that you can do. And I would say read stories. There are so many men who have gone through trials and tribulations, done, crazy things, and have turned their life around and become warriors, advocates, healers. And that's what our world needs.
Well, that's wonderful. I love leaving it on such a positive note. Thank you so much, Che.
Yeah, nice to chat with you. Take care.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick Here, Louisa Campos, and by me, Catherine Hertig. A special thanks to Che Burnett. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Center and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. If you're in Alberta and need help, please go to calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.